Hey, hello. Hi. Good morning, good night, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome, everyone, to this amazing. I was going to have this amazing opportunity here to talk with one of the masters of community. So I just want to make sure that you can hear us fine. So if you can hear us, quick say hello on the chat, just so you know that the sound is good, that you can hear okay, that we can see us fine. So we are here with Jono Bacon, and he's gonna introduce him in a minute. But just want to make sure that everyone can hear us. Already have lots of people online, and so Luciano can hear us. So hello, Luciano. I saw some other people here before. Jeremy, Juan. Hi everyone. Andrea can hear. So hello, Andrea, Luis, Antonio. Cool, Antonio. Hello, how's everyone? Gabriel, greetings from São Paulo. Yes, okay. Hi, Carlos. So, while we're at this, if you can take a second and tell us where you're from, right? So, I'm here in São Paulo, Brazil. Jono, where are you right now?
I'm in Northern California in America.
Oh, cool. Right. Okay. So, Claudio, Eduardo, let's see who else is here. Let's see where people are coming from. I see. So Eduardo is from Brazil. I saw lots of names. There are Brazilian names here. So I think that's, yeah, so Pedro's from São Paulo, so it's nearby. Hi, Natalie. Petrópolis in Rio. That's cool. Thiago is also from Brazil, Porto Alegre, Blumenau. Silvio cannot hear us. Waterloo, Ontario. San Francisco. Julius is in San Francisco. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So Wisconsin, Curitiba. All right. So yes. Okay, San Caetano. Cool. Lots of people from all kinds of different places. And we're gonna see Carlos is in São Paulo. Excellent. So Silvio's in Chicago. Hi, Silvio. Rio de Janeiro. So yeah, so we have people from lots of different places. The time doesn't work very well for Europe though, but US and Brazil's Lisbon, Portugal. Hi, Nuno. That's cool. So yes, we do have someone from Europe. That's great. Uberlandia. Cool. So we have people from all over. That's very, very cool. Right. Canada. That's wonderful. All right. Okay. So, let me quickly. So thanks everyone. Douglas is from Dallas. That's nice. So lots of cool people around here. Okay. So let me quickly tell everyone, it's great to have you all here. Today we're going to talk about communities, right? And we know that participating in communities is one of the things that have been changing lives for a lot of people. A lot of people become much better developers, much more influential people once they start participating in communities. And so, but only participating in communities, you can do much better than that, right? You can you can actually create communities, right? It's not only participating, you can be part of the communities. There's lots of different ways for you to participate and create communities. And that's why we have here, this guy it's an amazing community builder. So Jono Bacon, let me see. Actually, I'll get his book in a minute. It's behind me. But Jono Bacon is the author of this amazing book, The Art Community, where he explains everything we need to know about community building. And not only that, he's been helping out open source communities for a long time. He was a manager at Ubuntu. He created the Community Leadership Summit that joins together hundreds of community managers from all over the world. He's one of the guys responsible for all, a lot of things happening around OSCON, one of the largest open source conference in the world. So, with you guys, Jono Bacon. Hello, Jono. How are you doing, man?
Good, thank you, Bruno. What an introduction! Wow. Okay, I think Bruno's been at the booze, but I'm okay with that. Thank you, though. No, it's great to be here. It's great to see so many people from all over the place. So I also I need to make two very quick apologies. One is I literally just moved into this new house, and there's a million windows in my new office. So I just realized that light was coming in from all different directions. And then the other thing is, I just realized while you were speaking that this mug says Mr. Right on it, and I didn't realize until we got onto this. So I don't think I'm Mr. Right. This was a gift for my wife and I. So anyway, I just wanted to get that out there. I was very insecure for the first couple of seconds about that. So
No problem. So don't worry, because right now you are the master community leader. So for this webinar, you are Mr. Right.
The mug works. Okay.
The mug works exactly right. Okay, so no problem, Jono. Thanks a lot for being here. So let me just kind of get started in in a good way here.
Yeah.
I start talking about how participating in communities it's so important, and how to get involved in communities is so important. Am I exaggerating here, or actually it is something that's important, and people do increase their careers because they participate in the build communities?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, I try to in the work that I've done over the years, working for companies, or I'm a consultant now, and I work with companies to build communities. I always like to take a zoomed out look of like what is the core value of why we're doing this, and then zoom into all the details of how you do it and how you deliver it. So, getting to the reason why do we build communities, why is it valuable, is that I think human beings are fundamentally social creatures. We enjoy spending time with each other, even in the ubiquitous electronic age where everybody's wedded to their cell phones. What are we doing on our cell phones? People are communicating with each other on Facebook and Instagram and various other things. So I think people enjoy being social and being with other people. The thing that's exciting to me is when I first got interested in open source in 1998, the thing that really took my breath away about it was that people could collaborate from all over the world electronically. And that was kind of rare back then, in around that time frame. And I think when you get the right balance of like a mission and the right tools that people have got to work together and the right kind of engagement, it's amazing what you can produce. It's amazing what you can come out with. You can build incredible software. You can do social activism. You can build businesses. You can do all kinds of different things. But to me, whether you're building an open source community, whether you're building a local book club, whether you're building a community around your band or whatever it might be, the same core fundamental principles are working, which is, there's a set of human dynamics that people enjoy working with each other. People enjoy the validation. They want to do meaningful work. And so long as we have those ingredients in our communities, they'll generally succeed.
Okay. That's very good. So you mentioned open source community. You also mentioned things like book clubs, right? So when you talk about community, it's not only software communities, right? It's not only about about open source, right? So it's a much larger thing, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've seen this in many different examples. You've seen communities around documentation or writing, or research such as Wikipedia and various other things. You've seen, obviously, the huge open source community and communities around software, communities around hardware. But I think that communities can happen in any number of different areas. I mean, I've been consulting now full time for a couple of years. I used to do it on the side. And I've worked with probably about 20 to 30 clients, and they've spanned all kinds of different areas from networking organizations to consumer products to building communities inside of companies to make their teams more efficient to video games. There is value, I think, in building an energized, connected group of people in your audience in pretty much anywhere where you do it. And what's interesting is I think particularly, I was born and raised in the broth of open source. And we tend to think of open source as like the no pun intended, the canonical example of community. It's actually kind of weird compared to most communities. Like most communities aren't like the open source community, I would argue, because I tend to divide communities into either read or write. Like read communities, people who get together around something they're interested in, they share a common interest. It could be Taylor Swift, it could be something else. And then write communities are communities where people get together to build something. And write communities are a lot more complicated because you've got to figure out how to do peer review, and you've got to figure out how to make sure that people have got the right kind of tools and things like that. So I think sometimes in the open source world, we tend to think of other communities as a little bit more unusual, but I think it goes either way. And one other thing which I would say is, you can build passionate communities as well. Like in the open source world, we tend to think of communities that work are ones that are very independent. They don't have a strong commercial kind of underlying component, that the relationship between the company and the community is very clear. Whereas we see many examples of incredibly passionate communities wrapped around a company where the company is only benefiting really from the profit. So I'll give you one example of this. I'm a musician, and you know, like most musicians, I'm really into gear. And there's a company called Fractal Audio that I've become a huge fan of, and they build this device called an Axe Effects, and it's a guitar processor. And they've got a crazy passionate community wrapped around it. And part of the reason for that is, yeah, they've got a forum, and the company kind of engages with the forum, but they're nowhere near as sophisticated as a lot of, you know, typical open source type companies or software type organizations. But I think one of the reasons why they've got such a crazy committed community is because the company has demonstrated really respectful, good conduct towards the community over and over again. They issue one of these devices and they ship like 20 or 30 firmware updates over the course of a 5 or 6 year lifetime. They're always adding features. So there's a respect there. And I think that respect is a fundamental piece. If you don't have that, you can't create a good community around a shitty company. Like, it's just difficult to do that. So,
right. Okay, very cool. So let me just kind of do a notice here for everyone. You know, if you know, I see some people join here, Hassan, Danny, and some people said hello, Douglas. Things first, you know, you should be asking questions, right? The idea here is that we are live here with Jono, and if you have any issue with your community, bring to the table. I just want to go big here so I can do a little bit of promotion here. So
there it is.
That's Jono's book, right? The Art of the Community. You know, it's a great book.
Thank you.
Right? And actually, it talks all kinds of great content, you know, from planning, but there was one thing, Jono, that I want to ask you about. You know, you're talking here about communities with companies, and you mentioned, you know, when you have respect, right? How that thing goes. And one of these chapters in your book is you talk about, you know, making sustainable, right? Simple is sustainable. So yeah. Do you think that's, you know, being a sustainable community part of it?
Oh, I'm not sure if it's just me, but I lost you for a second there, Bruno.
Oh, you lost me for a second. Oh, maybe because my side. Okay, I'm better now. Well, yeah, someone said bad audio, so that's probably on my side, right? So, you know, so you know, you're talking about communities that you know, that respect, right? You know, companies that respect their customers and they respect their community. So, do you think that's that a goal of the community should be like be a sustainable community, and respect is part of this?
Yeah, I mean, very. You know, it's there is. I think part of the challenge here is that, and I noticed this with some of my clients, is that you see these incredible communities that wrap around companies or products or services or projects or whatever, and a lot of companies understandably say, "I want that. I want that. I want hundreds of thousands of people to be interested in what I'm doing." Like, I think a lot of executives in companies, for example, see the value of this, and it's unquestionable. But I think where there is sometimes where the knowledge is missing, if you will, is that to accomplish that, it's got to be a two-way street. Like, one of the things I often start out with is, like, there is, you know, when we zoom out and we see the value of what a community is, we can subdivide that into two areas. There's the value for the company itself, for example, or the project, whatever it might be, and then there's value for the actual individual who's participating in that community as well. And they're often a bit different, you know, like what's interesting and valuable to the company might be very different to the individual. So it's got to be, you've got to have that value clear on both sides. The individual who contributes to your community has got to feel that there's a value for them in doing so. But the company's also got to see value for them in facilitating this and kind of moving it forward. Mm-hmm. And what underlines all of that is going to be a respect. Now, respect to me is, you know, this respect and conduct are often conflated. Like, there's been a lot of conversation in recent years about about, you know, conduct and codes of conduct and things like that. To me, that's a baseline. Like, you should treat everybody with dignity. That just should happen, right? And if you don't have that, then you've got a real problem on your hands. But respect, I think, goes both ways. It's that respect to me is finding opportunity for the other person that they can harness, right? So the very best companies I've seen, the very best communities that I've ever seen, people are looking out for each other, and they're trying to find opportunity for each other. They're trying to find opportunities for each other, for other people in their community to succeed in different ways. So, you know, one of the things I always say is, you know, if you're going to build a community, everybody who's involved in the creation and the formation of that community needs to understand and know a community member. Like, you can't delegate this. This is one of the things that worries me a little bit about how we've seen, on one hand, we've seen this huge growth in community management, and that's good. And I think we're developing more expertise in how we build communities now than ever before. But I think some organizations look at those community managers as kind of the ambassador. Like, you go and work with the community, we'll build the thing, you go and work with the community. That's the worst way to do it. The only way in which you can build a thriving community that really is sustainable is that everybody in the company or the organization should have a responsibility in being part of that, right? Not just one or two people. Because otherwise, what happens when those two people leave? You're up the creek. And what it doesn't do is, you know, a community wants to understand the creators. Like, the view that I've kind of come to over the years, this is not a particularly scientific view, but it's certainly borne out from my experience, is that for about every 100 people that you find, 10 of those people will generate most of the material and the content that the other 90 will consume. And in that 100 people, one of those people will be a particularly energetic, self-organizing rock star, right? So the 90% of your community are not going to be super active. So first of all, we should set that expectation. But that's fine. You know, 90% of people in the world are not leaders, as an example. Most people tend to be followers, and a smaller proportion of people are leaders. So what we need to do is we need to optimize for setting up those 10 people in every 100 and the one person in everybody in every 100 to be successful. So
and there's a question from Jules that goes along talking about, you know, so he asked about how you draw a line between the commercial entity and, you know, the open source project. I mean, we can generalize a little bit more, not only open source, but, you know, in the community. But, you know, but if you create something that's created by a company that has a commercial agenda, can communities actually be built around commercial agendas also?
Yeah, I mean, the line between the company, I think, and the community, I think, is important, and it kind of makes me think of, you know, something my father-in-law once said to me was, one of the reasons why it's important that you should never lie is that if you're a liar, you have to remember what the lies are, and when you forget what the lies are, that's when you get in trouble. And in the same way that I think if the culture of the company and the culture of the community is so different, and you have to always be putting in place this delicate line to translate between the two, it's a lot of work to bear that, to try to understand that. So the best thing you can do is to operate the company and the community in a way where the cultures are as closely aligned as possible. So to give you an example in an open source setting, which was in Jules's question. If you're a company that wants to contribute to or build open source, it's very difficult to do that unless you yourself are actually utilizing open source principles in building software. Like, if you're, we see this all the time with like big banks, big corporate organizations who have, you know, waterfall-driven software development methodologies. They have like 11 or 17 like levels of complexity. It takes months to ship bug fixes. Is, you know, when they say, well, we want to work with the open source community, we want to better consume open source and participate in the rest of it, the first thing I always say is, well, the first thing we've got to do is you've got to get your engineering teams operating that methodology. Right. Because otherwise, how is that engineer going to know how to operate with, you know, how to work with an issue on GitHub, or how to work with a community in terms of peer review and code review? So I think those lines have to be as closely drawn as possible in terms of those cultural pieces. And the engineering workflow, frankly, is the easy bit. Like, it's relatively straightforward to take the open source methodology of how we build software, is somewhat well understood, and a lot of companies are now embracing that. The hard thing really is more around drawing the line between strategic direction for a product and the role that your community places in that. So do you include the community in the road mapping process? As a general rule, I'd say that's great if you know what you're doing. But if you don't know what you're doing, then you're going to tie yourself up in knots, and eventually the company will get sick of it and move on. So this is one of the things that came out of when I worked at Canonical on Ubuntu. One of the things I was really proud of the work that we did is that we really refined this 6-month release process. For you have a 6-month release cycle. You say at the beginning of that cycle, these are the things we want to work on. You track those blueprints in a public place. People sign up to do work. You do all that work publicly. Yes, there were things that the company worked on that were confidential, things for specific, partners or customers. That's fine. As a general rule, the norm was that the development and the road mapping was done generally out in the open. And when you do that on a cycle like that, when you have a cadence-related development process like that, what happens is once you've done it once, you say, that went okay, but we need to fix a load of stuff. So the next time you do it, you fix those things, and you iterate and you improve over and over and over again. And what happens is you end up finding the right process. But it's almost like learning anything in my mind. You've got to screw up to get it right. This is one of the reasons why I think when companies get exacerbated, when they're trying to find that balance and they're, pissing off community members and their staff, is like these are perfectly normal mistakes that need to be made to find the right process forward. So to me, it's like, in answer to Jules's question, try to balance those cultures as closely as possible, build really close relationships, not just through your community managers. The more the community has a sense that they can have a relationship with the leadership of that company, the better it's going to be for everybody. But a lot of that is going to be, in facilitating that, is going to be making sure that the company isn't bullied into it, that they are gently, if they're coming new to open source, that they're gently adapting to it. Like, the worst thing you can do is jump into a cold swimming pool. If you're learning swimming, settle yourself in, heat the temperature up a little bit, get used to it, and then gradually adapt. And the line naturally balances out.
Right. And it's scary, right? Because when you say you're doing things out in the open, and making the mistakes is totally part of the process. Yeah. But at the same time, every time you make the mistake kind of it's in the open, right? So people actually can see it and they can comment about, and it's a little bit like seeing sausage made, right?
Yeah.
So do you think companies are a lot of times trying to not show the problems that are going on, or they don't know how to deal with it? I know at Sun, for example, we made lots of mistakes, and a lot of times we did not know how to deal with that, and this kind of sounds really bad when it's like out in the open and you're making mistakes that are actually normal mistakes sometimes, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting. This is one of the reasons why I love doing this work, is that what interests me is I'm really interested in the psychology of how people think, and not from a snooty kind of like, I know more than you, because I don't. I'm as much of a student as anyone watching this.
But you're Mr. Right.
Mr. Right is getting increasingly empty, though. So the thing that excites me is there's like the psychology of how we do work, like how we build teams and how we engage with people and how we incentivize people. But then there's the psychology of how we go about doing that, right? And the psychology of how we do it is, in many cases, one of the notable things that I think affects the success of the work. And a lot of it is, frankly, based upon culture and based upon, people's upbringing and all the rest of it. Like, there are certain companies that I've worked with that the idea of public code review, even within an organization, even having a couple of your colleagues review your code, potentially colleagues from a different team, is a really tough pill to swallow. It's a very, very difficult concept. And the terrible analogy that I tend to use here, which I'm not sure is the best one. And let me put it this way. I've never been a nudist, but I imagine going to a nudist colony for the first time is awkward and weird because everything's out on display. You're new at it. You feel like you're being judged. You don't feel like you measure up in any way, figuratively or literally. And I think it's the same thing when you start building collaborative communities where the fundamental premise is that things are done in an open setting, either within the firewall of a company for an internal open source community, such as an inner source community, or publicly within a project. It's nerve-wracking. And that's one of the reasons why I think the way I tend to think of it is that I think community is a journey, and you start out when you're new, and then you become a regular, and then you become a leader in the community based upon the work that you do and how your work is recognized and things like that. When you're brand new at that colony, that's when things like mentoring and validation are critically important. And this is where I think as adults, we actually reflect a lot of the psychological traits that we see in children. When my son, who's quite young, when he does something for the first time, he's nervous and he questions himself and is a bit scared about whether he did a good job, and he tells himself that it's terrible. And a lot of people are like that when we do anything that's new. So that's why validation and mentoring plays such a critical role at that point. When you get further along and you got the hang of it, then it's not that big of a deal anymore. But the openness thing, again, it's like it's got to be an adaptive piece in my mind. It's got to be. I've seen some people who try to build communities and they basically lecture people into, well, this is the way communities work, and you have to do it this way if you're going to do communities right. That's not the right way to do it. You don't. Rome wasn't built in a day. So,
right. Yeah. Okay. So just kind of going along your lines, we had some people that couldn't come here but sent questions before the webinar. So sure. Morvana asks, along the lines here, she was asking how to engage the community among themselves, right? A lot of times that's the leaders, they don't have all the time, the word to keep pulling on the whole community. But you're saying here that when you're just starting, you need some mentoring, right? So how do you actually go about starting the community and mentoring the new people that come in, and so you actually get working and participate among themselves?
It's a great question. Who did you say asked the question?
It was Morvana.
Marvana?
She's a community leader in TDC, the Developers Conference.
Great. So thank you, Marvana, for the question. I think it's a really good question. The way I tend to think of it is, and this is not necessarily the only approach, it's just an approach that I found to work fairly well in my experience, is that one of the risks that we have with building communities is there are a million different variables that you can tweak. It's my other big passion is music, and I mix music and I record music. And one of the challenges with mixing music is you've got, like, let's say you've got 50 different tracks all playing at the same time. And for each of them, you can apply EQ and compression, and you can apply effects and limiting. And it's just an abundance of options. And sometimes having too many options can cloud our judgment actually delivering what's best for whatever you're working on. So the way I tend to think of it is to break it down into is to construct a model that you can look at the problem through. And the model that I tend to think of in how you spin up a community is, the first thing is to break down, like, what is the value that you want to bring? I know it sounds like a horrible kind of like cheesy management, the kind of thing that you slowly drift off to sleep at a seminar in a drafty conference center in Orlando. But, identify the value that you want to derive, first of all. And then if you've got a company attached to this, what's the value for the company? What's the value for the individual? And in thinking about the value for the individual, break that down into a set of personas. So do you want to attract developers? Is it documentation writers? Is it translators? Like, what are the types of people? Because that's going to tell you the types of things that you need to provide. So for developers, you need an for example, with an open source project, you need a GitHub or a GitLab repo. You need open issue tracking. You need to have some continuous development tools, all that kind of stuff. You need to have some documentation. And when you think about those different roles, then design the on-ramp for how someone gets from starting out to delivering something of value. And this is one of the areas where I think so many organizations and communities get it wrong, is they're so busy focusing on growing their Twitter following and organizing meetups that they forget to, you know, put their brains into incognito mode and look at their community through the lens of a brand new person who's unfamiliar with any of this stuff. And what is the experience of going from learning about, like, oh, I'd like to contribute something, to actually successfully contributing it? You've got to make sure, in my mind, that that experience is effortless, right? The amount of GitHub repos that I've seen that don't have a README and don't have a contributing.md, where it takes 3 hours to set up the tool chain. It's ridiculous, because what happens, you can do all the outreach in the world, but when you pull people in and you say, go and get started, and they get stuck setting their tool chain up, then you've lost them.
Right.
So to me, the on-ramp is important. And then the next piece is then breaking it into that kind of like new regular and leaders. And I think you need to service all three of those. So to me, with the new people, it's all about encouragement and mentoring and validation. The comparison I tend to use is, I think of setting up communities as a bit like setting up a restaurant. I've never set up a restaurant, but my wife and I are really into food, as my waistline demonstrates. And if you walk past a restaurant and there's no one in there, you don't want to go in, right? You're not interested. But if you walk past a restaurant and there's a load of people in there, or there's a line coming out the door, and you see a table in there, you're interested, is that the crowd has validated it for you. It's the same thing with communities. If you walk up to a community, there's nothing going on, there's no issues submitted, there's no pull requests, the last update to the repo was 6 months ago, you're going to think it's basically dead. Whereas if you go there and it's thriving and it's bustling, then you want to stick around. So once we've optimized our on-ramps and we've started focusing on that, we then need to build that momentum. We need to fill the restaurant, and that's going to be through outreach. But then when people come in, is encouraging and motivating them. And a lot of that, frankly, is just one-on-one support and guidance. It's answering a million emails. It's responding to people on Discourse or Slack or in your issue tracker. And at the beginning, it's incredibly time intensive, because you've got to try and be constantly, encouraging and getting these folks going. But as you do that, and as people go from being new into the regulars, those regulars will then start mentoring your new people. And that's then how you build scale. Most communities don't have the hockey stick, right? It's you have that in certain cases. We were lucky in Ubuntu in the fact that we kind of had a bit of a hockey stick going on. But let me tell you, it's hard work when you get that, because you're then confronted with all of these people who want to help, and you don't have the scaling abilities to kind of get there. It took me, 7-8 years to build a team of 6 people that could scale up to do some of that stuff. So actually not having everybody walk into your restaurant at the same time is a good thing. To not extend the restaurant analogy too far, that's one of the reasons why a lot of famous people don't like to mention the restaurants that they love, because everybody goes there and then the restaurant gets, overwhelmed. So that's the model that I tend to think of it. And not to be explicit, just think of that as a lens to look at your community through, and then to make sure you're moving the needle in all of those different areas concurrently, and then it will just naturally grow. It's like growing a garden, I'd say, in that regard.
So with all this planning and a lot of this mentoring to get the community off the ground and everything.
Yeah.
Is community building something that can only be done by companies, or a well-meaning individual can actually create a community and get something started? How does that work?
I think that I think there is opportunity everywhere for this. It's yes, companies. The benefit of a company, of course, is that someone getting paid a salary to spend the time and the effort to build a community. It means that they can feed their family and they can build a community, and that's great. So if you're doing this voluntarily, then it's you've probably got a day job, unless you're ludicrously wealthy. But I think I don't see any reason why anyone couldn't build an incredible community. The thing that I think it needs, if you want to do this well, and for it to succeed is it needs somebody with a really kind of like an entrepreneurial drive to kind of get stuff. And the good news here, and I think the great news, particularly for, I'm sure some people watching this will be quite young in their careers, or maybe students at university or at high school or something, is there is so much opportunity to make a mark, to start shaping your career, to start shaping your future, without necessarily going the usual route of, you know, going to university and then going for your first job, which is terrible, and then going for your second job, and you can't get a job because you need experience, but you don't have the experience. There are so many communities out there that are dying for somebody to go in there and help and get people motivated and get people going, get people excited, and just build a resume out. Like, just to speak personally, and I'm not suggesting that I'm in any way, the way I've done it is the only way to do it, but just when I was 17, I was not interested in school. I really flunked my A-levels, and I got pretty terrible grades and went to a pretty average university. But I discovered Linux and open source, and I was so captivated by the potential of people building communities that I just started contributing. I just started hanging out. And part of the reason for that was because I saw these people who I respected building all this software, and I wanted to make my contribution. And I'm not a great software engineer, so that was the way in which I could help. So, but it requires that kind of self-startering. Like, you know, you gotta stick with it, and you're going to have some days where you can't be bothered, but you just keep going, you keep pushing, you keep learning, and looking at every moment of that as a learning experience. Even the terrible times when you screw up and you think, God, I can't believe I did that, is that you look at that as a moment where you think, you know what, I screwed that up, but I won't do that again. So to me, there's tremendous opportunity for anyone watching this, and whether you're in a company or beyond, to build an incredible communities and And there will be. It's only a matter of time before we have the next major community hit that doesn't come from a company. Right. You know, it's only a matter of time before it happens. So.
Yeah, and I think that you said here this whole idea of, you know, having someone that's entrepreneurial and that he keeps doing it. And the experience that I have with the JavaScript groups community is that, you know, the user group exists, the more impact it actually has, right? And so, you know, the people that keep insisting. And sometimes it looks like, you know, you don't have enough time to do everything you can. But the longer you insisted, the more important this whole thing gets. And I think that's a really, really true.
Well, I would say, Bruno, you're a great example. Like, I've known you for I don't even know how long now, and you've been just, you know, you don't take orders from people. You just get out there and do it, and you just make it happen. And, you know, like the last time I bumped into Bruno was in a hotel at midnight, and I came back after a night of drinking, and we made this video, and that was all your idea. Like, you came up with that. I think a lot of this, and this is where it gets into that psychological piece of, is just not being afraid of adversity. Like, people, you're going to screw up, you're going to fail, whatever, who cares, move on. And that's, I think, the people who succeed in not just community, but more broadly in their lives, the people who are unafraid to just make a go of it and give it a shot. And what's the worst that's going to happen? The worst is that you're going to fail. So yeah, I think there's tons of opportunity for that.
Cool, very cool. So Silvio is asking here. Let me switch gears a little bit. So Silvio is asking, what are your ideas about user group or meetup model, right? You know, assembling a community around a product, a platform, or service from some company. You know, is that an easy way or a hard way to start a community?
I think it really depends on what the thing is, but I think meetups and user groups are a great way to build communities, particularly if there is a central subject area that people are trying to master, right? So, you know, the very first community I ever set up actually was a Linux user group based in this town, Wolverhampton, in the UK. And the reason why I set it up was because I wanted to meet other people who were interested in Linux, which back then there weren't many. Also, I just wanted to learn about it. I wanted to master my skills of utilizing and using Linux. So where there is a where there is a thing that people care about, and obviously Java user groups are a brilliant example like this. Like Java is a mound of things that you can learn and improve. So it's a little bit more complicated, I think, to set up those kinds of communities if you're talking about big general concepts. Like I used to work for an organization called XPRIZE, and we set up a bunch of these XPRIZE think tanks all over the world, where people kind of got together to discuss like big moonshot ideas like 3D printing and sustainable farming and space travel and all that kind of stuff. And they were fun, but you get to a point where you've had so many of those conversations, and then for certain types of people, you kind of want to get on and do something, and then people who do want to do something, they tend to lose interest. So I think if you've got a product or a service, then there's a ton of potential there. In terms of meetups, in particular, there's been a massive growth, I think, in meetups in recent years. Primarily, I think, through Meetup.com, which has provided a good platform where anybody can set up meetups. But to me, what's more important than setting up meetups is setting up user groups, because the amount of meetups where you go, you meet some great people, you have some really great conversations, and there's a lot of, we should do that. And then you go home, you wake up the following day, and nothing happens. The thing I love about user groups is the best user groups I've ever seen. There is discussion and collaboration and continuation in between the meetings. Like you have projects, you have things that you work on, and I think that is way more powerful. So meetups to me are an execution or a component of a good user group. And the general view that I've had here is, with either a user group or with a meetup, is to try to put always create recipes for repeatedly executable things. So, for example, with a meetup, when I mentioned XPRIZE, when I used to run the community at XPRIZE, we created 4 or 5 like templates for how you could run a meeting, like a meetup. And it meant that any of the groups all over the world they had a recipe book that they could kind of go from, instead of saying to people, go and organize a meetup and no one really knows how to get started. So I think the more guidelines you can provide for that, the better. And again, it gets back to that, like, try something, iterate on it, revive it, and improve it. And what happens is, when you do that over and over again, when you gather feedback from the participants in the group, you end up getting a really rock solid community that wraps around it.
Right. Yeah, and I totally agree with the things you're saying. And one of the things that you mentioned about, the user group having, this product, this common interest among people. And when you get something that's very broad, it's very hard to actually find this common interest, right? Yeah. So that's why I think, for example, you get, you mentioned Java user groups, and Java was, I think, at the right level of abstraction, because it's a very broad technology, but it's a common interest can have, and they can come together. You see, for example, how successful are open source projects, that people have one interest in the project, and that how they work well together. But at the same time, when you have like more generic things, like when we tried at the open source initiative, we tried to create open source user groups, so that becomes more amorphous. There's not so many common interests, right? Because there's on an open source user group, you have all kinds of just diverse interests, right? People that want to work on Linux, people that want to work on software. There's all kinds of different things. Yeah. And I see the same thing inside companies, for example, right? You say you get, for example, you get Java. Java, again, is like one technology with many companies. But then you have, for example, Google user groups or Oracle user groups. And those are, like, at the same time, they are more specific to one single company, but they span such a wide variety of products and technologies that you also fail to have the common interest. So what do you think about these dynamics? Where should we be, if someone wants to build a community, where should it start, right? How you judge this very broad to very specific thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, and that's where I think, my general view is there is not many places I've seen so far where it's impossible to build a community. But I think there are certain areas where the patterns and the models for community building are better understood. So you know, whether we're talking about Java or whether we're talking about Linux or whether we're talking about the axe effects that I mentioned earlier on. The reason why those communities work, I think, is because another human dynamic that I think we've seen consistently over the years is that people enjoy mastery. They enjoy the idea of mastering a thing, whether it's a programming language or an operating system or a guitar tool, whatever it might be. And when you build a community that is focused on mastery, then it gives people, the value proposition is very clear. It's like, I can go here and I can become better. Like, I can spend time in the communities that I've been a member of, where I've been involved in the mastery side of things. I've seen tangible results. I've got better due to my participation in that community. And a lot of that participation is reading. I'm not actually posting anything. I'm just reading something, but I'm connected. So I think some of it is just evaluating, like, to what level is mastery a component in the community that you're building. Another common area here is just optimization and workflow, which we see more of in the business world. Like, a bunch of my clients are focused on optimizing how their teams work. So it's community building, but it's kind of organizational design. But, you know, the assessment that I would make here is, look at, when you think about this community in your head, think about objectively, like, would people be really interested? Like, try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else. Would they be really interested in what you're talking about? And maybe do a little bit of independent research and, you know, ask some friends what they would think. Now, your friends are going to lie to you, first of all. They're all going to say that your idea is brilliant. So you got to say to them, I want you to tell me if you think this is a terrible idea. I want you to tell me if this isn't a good idea. You've got to give people permission to give you to give you negative feedback or critical feedback. So, but I do a bit of research and I look at what other communities that are similar to this. Like, if there's another community that you are thinking of as the model that's similar to what you're talking about, then it's almost certainly gonna means that you've got a shot at it. You've got a chance to do something great. And the final thing I would say there as well is, if you see another community that's doing a really good job of what you're talking about, there's always opportunities to differentiate, to be unique. Like, so you don't have to feel like, well, first of all, it's not necessarily a competition, but you don't have to necessarily feel, well, you know, they're doing that, so we shouldn't even try. Well, you know, we evolve. So
yeah, you know, you're totally right. You know, I had a very interesting experience. I just did a tour in Europe, visiting several user groups, and I've met the guys from the Amsterdam Java user group, and it was very funny because I know the guys from the NL Java user group for a long time. So I was kind of surprised to see that right in the middle of Netherlands, there's another very strong user group, the Amsterdam user group, and you know, the differentiated factor was the Amsterdam user group was created by someone that does not speak Dutch, right? So he created a English-based user group in the middle of the Netherlands, right? And it makes a lot of sense. And both groups work very well together, and they kind of, you know, they co-organize things and everything like this. But there's always a way for you to differentiate and finding, you know, if you think about your audience, right, who your audience is, there's always a way for that you can help your audience become better, right?
yeah, no, definitely. I mean, when I set up the Wolverhampton Linux user group, I didn't think of it from a differentiation perspective, but what I wanted to do with that group, and I was hell bent on this. Like, there was no negotiation on this when I started this group. Was I didn't want it to be in a university lecture theatre with a bunch of presentations and everybody sits around, you know, drinking coffee in cardboard cups. I wanted us to meet in a pub where everybody would have a curry and there was no presentations. It was just hanging out with your friends and chatting. And we developed a reputation in the UK of kind of being the social lug, for good and bad reasons. You know, our Christmas parties were a little intense, but it was different, you know, and we had massive respect to the other groups that would prefer to meet in a lecture theatre and have a more formal setting. And that's fine, because a lot of our members would go to both. So
right. Okay, so Lucas talks here about right. So he says people gonna say, why to invest time in open source project if already, if it exists in a free alternative? Do you think that people still think about open source project only as an alternative that they don't need to pay, or maybe a different question would be, why would you participate in an open source project and put your time into it if there's not going to be any money contribution to end?
It's a good question, and it kind of really gets to the heart of like the value of open source. To me, there's a couple of threads to this. First of all, open source really isn't about software being free, in my mind. To me, the value of open source is there's so many layers to it. Like the first thing is you get better software. Like if you have an open source methodology for how you build software, either inside of a company or outside of a company, or a hobbyist project or whatever, you get better code. And it's not necessarily that you get better developers, it's just that you get developers peer reviewing each other's code in a I think a more objective way. When you get better code, you get faster code, you get more efficient code in terms of the user experience, and you get more secure code. So I think you get a better product. I think with open source, you get to scale. You can build a much bigger engineering team, and you also get all of the additional interested parties who are not programmers. Like there's like a personality in the open source world of people who really feel like they want to contribute, but they really doubt their programming skills. So they typically want to contribute as documentation writers and translators and testers and stuff like that. And those people offer a huge amount of value, right? I mean, when I was at Canonical, I remember writing a gamification platform for Ubuntu called Ubuntu Accomplishments. I wrote it in Python, so don't kill me, Java people. And and I put it into Launchpad, which is kind of like GitHub, and it was translated into 11 languages in less than 24 hours. Amazingly powerful. So to me, you get a better product. But I think what you do is, when you build the value of open source to me is that what you do is you build a sustainable development model and a collaboration model of which the code is a really powerful artifact. If you build software inside of a company, I think you can get some of that. And if you make software and it's closed, but you give it away for free, a lot of that kind of died out in the 90s with shareware. And open source, I think, kind of replaced a lot of that. But the other thing I would say, without suggesting that the popular view is always the right one, but open source is one. Like the majority of infrastructure today is running on open source. Open source is powering our phones and our laptops and our devices and all the rest of it. Like open source has become the way in which people build software. And there are some organizations that aren't doing it that way, largely due to regulatory or command and control reasons, but it'll happen. It's only a matter of time. If for no other reason it'll happen, it'll be happening because they can't hire people, because everyone's growing up now in an open source world. Like most young engineers who are growing up today are growing up in the GitHub generation, and you don't want to go and sit in an office and not be able to collaborate with your colleagues on software if you're an engineer. So.
Yeah, Simon Phipps likes to say that open source is the natural way that we do software once we are in a network environment, right? So
yeah,
that's.
I don't always agree with Simon, but he's right.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So Eduardo is asking. I think that's. I know you have like a cut off time in a few minutes. So so Eduardo kind of comes to the heart of all discussion here, because the whole idea of of building communities and participating in communities, it's all about we improving ourselves as developers, and we having a larger chance in our careers and things like that. So Eduardo asked, what are the core skills and knowledge that you think are necessary to both start a community or to participate in one community as a developer?
It's a great question. Yeah, it's a nice kind of one that caps off the discussion. I think in terms of, you know, to me, the traits of people who want to build great communities and the traits of people who want to build great software are very similar. They are invariably self-motivated people who want to master an art form, whether it's the art of community, no pun intended in terms of my book, or whether it's the art of software development. And I think that, you know, there are obviously differences. There are some people who are very, very great software engineers and they don't care about communities and not people. So I think, but I think fundamentally it's about mastery and learning and embrace, without sounding too cheesy, you know, failing forward and learning from failure and learning from adversity and thriving on it and doing you know, writing crappy code, you know, making poor choices about how you build a community and getting, you know, having no one show up to your meetup and knowing that this is not going to happen again. You're going to fix it the next time. So I think there's a kind of a core element of just powering through, you know, like you've just got to get on with it. And everybody has got the opportunity to do that. Many people have complicated situations. You know, people have, you know, members of minorities and communities often struggle a lot more at this than others. So it's not the same for everybody, but I think everybody's got an opportunity to do great stuff here. I'm a big believer in a philosophy called Stoicism. And if there's one thing I would recommend everyone who's, I promise you I'm not on commission. So this Ryan Holiday wrote The Obstacle is the Way, which the whole point of this is to look at obstacles, to look at failure as an opportunity to learn and to succeed. And I think people who do well in their careers in whatever basically do that. But I think particularly people in communities and developers find that. I think with community folks, the kinds of personalities that do particularly well here are people who have this magical combination of they're very organized and very disciplined, but they have the ability to interface and engage with people. And human nature isn't organized and disciplined; it's messy. So I think people who can engage with people and understand people's driving forces and convert that into real stuff that you can do and real work that can be delivered are the kind of people who tend to do a good job there. And that is not something that you have to be born with. That is absolutely something you can learn. That is something you can evolve and grow at. Like, I don't want anyone to hear that and think, well, I'm not like that, so I can't do it. Bollocks. Everybody can do it. So.
Okay, very, very cool. So now you mentioned 2 books that you should be looking about, right? So let me mention a 3rd book here that everyone watching this should be reading, right? The Art of Community from Jono Bacon, right? So this book is amazing, right? And I tell you this because I've been building communities for a long time, and there's a lot of things in it that I didn't know, right? Even though I had done this for quite some time. And you know, it covers a whole lot of different topics and contents. I do suggest you take a look if you want to build a community, if you want to participate in a community. You know, Jono had an amazing work here on the art of the community. So, Jono, just kind of, I know we're right at the top of the hour here, and you know, thanks very, very much for being here with us.
No, thank you.
I think we've answered. I think we've pretty much answered everything. I think Jules had one comment that I think was more like a comment than a question. That's why I skip it. He said that, you know, once everyone's participating in open source, then the whole threat of code review and things like that kind of diminished because everyone is doing it, right? So I think your point about mentoring and nurturing new contributors, they're going to feel less threatened, right? So. And I think that he's totally right of this, that, you know, for us to build community, we have to be in a welcoming environment. We have to kind of create this welcoming environment. And so, you know, as some just kind of last comments here, if there was one thing that people could do, maybe today, maybe even before they get out, they turn off their computers right now after this conversation, I suggest it would be the one thing they could do to really start getting into this mindset of participating in building communities?
One thing to do. That's a really great question. I think this is going to sound a little bit cliche, but I think the best thing you can do is to get a piece of paper, write on it, I am going to build an incredible community, put the date on it, put it in a frame, and stick it on your office wall, and look at it every day until you make that happen. Like, just be unafraid, you know, and just get out there and do it. And read everything that you can find. You know, I'm happy for people to email me. Jono@jonobacon.com is my email address. There's that, you know, but just get out there and do it, make it happen, and join a community, start a community, find something that you're passionate about and make it work. But having that reminder hanging on your wall, that helps. I did that years ago. I wrote it down, I stuck it on my wall, and every time I got into work, I was like, ugh. Damn you, previous Jono.
Okay. All right, Jono, that was really amazing. Thanks very, very much. Those great insights. And I think that you know, this is one thing. I think Jono said it's a little cheesy, but I'll tell you what, you know, the one thing you can do right now is do an action right now, and that's the idea. Write it down. You're going to build a great community. That's a great idea, because that will put you in the mindset of wanting to do this, right? So Rodrigo has just posted the artofthecommunityonline.org that you can take a look at more information about the book. And Jono, thanks so much for your presence here. And if we get any more questions, I will send you the email so you can answer to whatever question that's still in people's mind. Thanks very much for being here with us.
Thank you.
All right, for everyone else, thanks very much for being here. Questions, you know, we're gonna be always doing this conversations at Code for Life to actually get insights from the top experts in the industry to come here and help you improve your careers. So thanks very much. Thanks everyone for participating. Thanks a lot.